This podcast episode was originally recorded for Mormon Sex Info and is being refurbished for your enjoyment here at the Healing Souls Podcast.
Hello, today I have a repeat guest, Alisha Worthington. She got some great reviews on her podcast on lubrication, which if you're interested in that topic, I strongly suggest. It was a great podcast. I even learned a lot of stuff myself. And just so happy to have her back. She's a sexual educator and coach in the Salt Lake City, Utah area, and she is currently working towards certification as a sex educator through ASECT, and just a lovely person with just so much knowledge, and I always appreciate having her on. So welcome back, Alisha.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I love chatting with you about sex.
Yeah, it's always a fun thing to do. And today we're going to cover a topic that I've been asked a lot about, and I think it's a great topic, and this is how do we offer good sexual education to pre-adolescent children? So we're really going to be talking from birth to kind of prepubescent, so 10, 11 years old, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. And so we have a lot of different things we want to cover. So I think I'm going to just start by saying something that I think most of us have heard, which is we are born and die sexual beings. So what are we supposed to do with that as parents, just from an education perspective and a protection perspective? And I'll just kind of let you lead as far as what you want to start with.
Okay. I think I want to reiterate what you just said, because I think sometimes for a lot of people that statement, we are born and we die as sexual beings, that even causes people pause, because sometimes sex is associated with just intercourse or things you do when you're married or as an adult, as opposed to the wide range of what sexuality means. And to broaden the definition of sexuality and sexual health, I think can help parents begin to see their child as that their sexuality is an innate part of their humanity, and to teach them all about their body and how it works and how it functions is a crucial part to them experiencing as much happiness and joy as they can while they're here. That this is not something that is to be seen as dirty or something to overcome, but is to be seen as something integral to who we are.
Yeah, that's a great start, especially this idea of it being integral to part of our identity, that our sexuality is just as much a part of us as our spirituality, our emotionality, our physicality, right? So these are all integrated into who we become.
What I generally start with parents is I ask them to close their eyes, and so whoever's listening, close your eyes for a minute, and think of your children as they are right now, whether they're babies, toddlers, or even older, but for the sake of this podcast, your young children, and I want you to imagine them at 17, and then again at 25, and then again at 35, all the way up to their old age. And how do you want them to experience their own bodies, their sexuality, perhaps in a sexual relationship with somebody else? What do you want that to look like for them? Do you want them to be happy, satisfied, curious, playful, or do you want them to be fearful, filled with anxiety, which it's easy to say no. Every parent would say, no, I don't want that. However, because sexuality can be so scary for many parents, we generally start with, okay, I just don't want my kid to have sex at 13. I don't want that. And it's fear-based. So how do I stop that? And how do I stop them from ever masturbating? Or how do I stop them from doing all of these things that I don't want them to do? And we start sending out negative messages about their bodies or sexuality as opposed to seeing the whole picture. And if you can see the whole picture, then you can back up 20 years to where they are now and incorporate a more holistic aspect to your teaching. of course, teach them, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but of course, teach them boundaries and consent and safety. And at the same time, you're teaching them about the beauty of their bodies and what they can do. It comes as a whole approach.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting exercise to walk through, because I often talk about this idea that sexual education is usually given at a time in people's lives when nobody wants them to have sex, right? So when we're teenagers, or when we're young adults, or even, a little bit in childhood. But then it's not like then there's like adult sexual education. I mean, if there is, if you really look for it or pay for it or go to sex therapy or sex educator, but as far as our overall education, that's not really offered.
That's right. We are sending people are entering into relationships really without understanding this integral part. I often say that people start having sex long before they know how to talk about it or know anything about it. We just kind of dive in. And so to back up, what parents don't realize is that they are teaching their kids sex education from the second they are born. A lot of times we think, oh no, we'll have the talk at 8, and then maybe some sort of review when they're 16 and starting to date, and then I'm good, that's it. Well, actually, from the second you hold that little baby and you are kissing that baby or cuddling that baby, you're teaching them about their body, and you're teaching them what feels good and ways that their bodies can be interacted with. And parents are very intimate with their babies. We do cuddle, we nuzzle into their necks, and we kiss their little folds, and we adore just looking at their little bodies. And it's a very beautiful kind of intimacy. And then as they get older and they begin at age 2, when they start to discover that they really enjoy being naked, and they're pulling off their diapers and running around everywhere and flashing their butts to everybody, and they think it's great. This is about the age, 2 and 3 is about the age when parents start to try and manage that behavior, but sometimes, again, it comes from a fear-based or a not, just kind of a misunderstanding. If we want to get into a little bit of, because what happens at this age, around 3 to 5, so normal for children to discover, especially little girls, little boys, that touching their genitals feels good. Like, wow, this is a place on my body that I can interact with that has a lot of nerve endings, and it feels really good. And I'm going to touch it, and I'm going to keep touching it. Just like they explore their noses, and they're picking their noses like crazy. And parents are trying to manage that and saying, okay, please don't pick your nose at church in front of everybody. Let's go to the bathroom and pick your nose. They're sticking their fingers in their nose and in their ears and any place that they can put their fingers. And one of those is their own genitalia. And there seems to be a bit more fear around little girls touching themselves as opposed to little boys. I don't know if it's just because we're used to, since the penis is on the outside and little boy babies are grabbing it from the very beginning. I'm not sure, or it's just an underlying fear of we need to control female sexuality, and there's some other things that go along with that. But generally when little girls, this is about the age that little girls start to get shamed into never touching themselves again, or never looking at their body again. Don't touch that, keep your fingers off. And it can be shaming for them, which then carries into their adult life. And or, like I said, I'm not trying to invalidate concern that parents have, because they do feel concerned, but it's more of a learning to teach their child the same way that you would teach them to pick their nose. Like, learn to manage this, and please understand, parents out there, that your 3-year-old is not fantasizing about sex. Your 3-year-old or 4-year-old or 5-year-old, if they're touching themselves, 99.9% of the time, they are not fantasizing about sex. They are using this as a way to release some stress, to feel good, to zone out, and they just know that it's a part of their body that feels good.
Yeah, and even if they're fantasizing about something, when you're getting more into 5, 6, 7-year-olds, they're usually fantasizing about relationships.
Right.
So
Yes.
I remember at a very early age, kind of imagining myself as Cinderella, and the prince would come, and all of that felt really good, but I wasn't necessarily, fantasizing about a sexual act. But, let's back up for a little bit, because I think what you're bringing up is such an important part, and it's so tied to how we are triggered maybe by some of these words. Like when you're talking about, we start teaching children about their sexuality from the time that they're infants, and then talk about how we nuzzle and hone in on this closeness with our babies. I can see a lot of people being really alarmed by that type of, like, are you saying that we're attracted to our babies or have sensual arousal towards our babies? Or I would never want any of my love and devotion and adoration to be seen as sexualized. We're so, like, pedophile, like, frantic, and just, like, nobody wants to have that particular issue, and so I think that it's just a really important thing to talk about, that it's obviously the affection that we show for our babies is not, for most of us, generally sexualized, unless you do have a pedophilic issue, which that's a whole nother, we won't even bring that up again, because that's a whole nother animal. But that this is really more about relationship with body and pleasure, and that in essence ties into sexuality over time and comfort over time. And it doesn't mean that children will then sexualize their parents in the sense of arousal and eroticism, which is different than the definition of sexuality. So do you want to just clarify that a little bit more?
So a lot of times what happens is that a lot of adults have some sort of difficulty at some point in their lives with sexuality, whether it's shame or a bad relationship, there is something about their sexuality where they have experienced pain. And then what can happen is we can project that onto our own children or onto ourselves, or try and think, oh, is this what they're experiencing, or is this, and in no way am I suggesting that the interaction we have with our babies is sexual. What I am saying is it's beginning to teach them the joy of just being physically close to somebody, and how that feels physically good to our bodies. As human beings, we are wired for touch, and we are wired for good and healthy touch, and that from the beginning, that's what we're teaching our little babies, is this sort of touch feels good, it feels nice and comforting. And then yes, as you were saying, as these babies mature into puberty and beyond, then those feelings start to change for others and have a more sexual undertone, or can. But it's really nice to have the notion that physical intimacy is just as important for a human being as can be sexual intimacy, but just touch overall, and healthy touch. And that's what parents are teaching their babies early on.
And so then moving into this idea of self-touch, pretty much all of my boys were, immediately, as soon as diaper came off, hand to penis. I mean, that was like an automatic response. And that kept on, in the bathtubs as we were bathing, or things of that nature. I think girls oftentimes can also touch, or the other more common thing that girls do that isn't necessarily as common with boys is that they'll rub up against something. And so to see, a 3 to 4-year-old girl or your daughter start acting in kind of a sexual, humping way, absolutely can bring up a lot of anxiety and discomfort for a parent who in no way, shape, or form sees their 3 or 4-year-old as a sexual being, right? And so that's a pretty natural response, that then if we don't catch that anxiety and that fear-based response, we can give some really unintentionally harmful messages to our young girls.
Yeah, and because we do have the taboo around really self-touch and or leading into masturbation as older children or teenagers. Again, it's such a normal part of human development. If you look at just any sort of developmental chart or scale, whatever, you will find this listed, that self-touch and self-exploration is a part of a child's development. And in fact, babies have been seen in utero stroking themselves. And it just happens to be that due to the nerve endings that are in that part of the body, a lot of endorphins are released. And it can be very comforting and very self-soothing. But I think into their vocabulary when they're teaching their little kids about their body parts. But by doing so, you also create a sense of normalcy. Like, oh, this is just a normal part of my body, like my elbow or my shoulder. But then you do run a certain risk. For example, I have 7 kids, and I was in the front room with my 15-year-old and 12-year-old one day, and my 3-year-old came running out of the bathroom completely naked, and she came into the front room and pulled up her labia so you could kind of see her clitoris, and with joyful excitement just said, "What is this?" And of course, my 15-year-old and 12-year-old were rolling their eyes, but I looked at my 15-year-old and said, "Okay, what is it? Teach her." And she said, "Oh, it's the clitoris." I said, "Yep, it's the clitoris, and what's it for?" And my 15-year-old said, "Well, it's for pleasure." I said, "Yep, that's what it is."
Your 15-year-old is all sad about this.
Yep. But again, it's kind of just an example of how these little conversations can happen all the time, but also the importance of naming that body part. Studies show over and over that when children know the correct names of their body parts, it actually helps prevent them from being in a potentially sexually abusive relationship, or it gives them more confidence over their own bodies to kind of say, no, you can't touch me there, no, you can't touch that. Elizabeth Smart has come out saying we need to be giving correct terminology, and this is so important. So if there's anything that I would get across to parents today is, I know it's cute to use little fun words for the penis and for the vagina or whatever you want to say, but please consider changing and using correct terminology so that your children can learn these words, even just for the sake of their safety.
Well, and I love that you talked about teaching your daughter the word vulva versus vagina. It's interesting that I've noticed that most children know the 2 words vagina and penis. Mm-hmm. But I think the reason why that was such a popular word for such a long time is because, again, most sexual education is reproductive and not pleasure-based. Yes. So that's the reproductive part. The baby comes out of the vagina. Mm-hmm. But vulva is more what the girl can see or touch, and so that's the more accurate name. And or labia, or even like clitoris. These are words that many women have not heard of until they're college aged or older.
I didn't know. Here I am, a sex educator, but at 26, I did not know that it was called a vulva. I just thought the whole thing was a vagina. So anybody out there who's listening, don't feel embarrassed or ashamed. It hasn't been part of our culture to teach girls the difference between vulva, vagina, and labia, clitoris. It just hasn't been part of the terminology. Right. But it for their own sexual health, it really needs to be.
Yeah, I remember sitting in an anatomy class, and just being really frustrated that I had been taught so little about my own body, that I just did not know so many of the different names, because there's a lot of different parts, in that area. We have outer labia, inner labia, clitoris, urethra, just so many different things, and I felt very robbed that none of those things had been taught to me earlier on.
Yeah, and we are more willing to say penis and testicles and scrotum to our boys and our girls, but we need to get more comfortable. If you have to go in the bathroom and just say the word vulva over and over in the mirror until you get more comfortable with it, do it. And then you'll just add it as part of the vocabulary, and your daughter will just, and your son will just think it's part of the normal part of the conversation.
Right.
They won't even have to know that you were uncomfortable with it.
Right. Yeah, like our own discomfort is perfectly normal, right? Nobody needs to feel shamed about their own discomfort. I talk about that all the time, that I can talk sex all day long, but when it comes to my own kids, there's still things that happen to me in my body language that I need to check and be careful about, because it is so much about just the taboos that we've all been faced with as we've been raised, ourselves.
Absolutely. I'm gonna call out my 18-year-old, and maybe she'll listen to this or maybe she won't, but she sat down with me not too long ago and really wanted to flesh out. She said, "Mom, I'm not planning on having sex with my boyfriend, but I really want to know why I wouldn't. I really want to talk about this." And the mom part of me still kind of freaked out, like, what? I okay, I don't know that I want to talk to you about this. And then luckily the sex educator in me came forward and said, absolutely, we will talk about this. And I'm so grateful you want to talk to me about this. But I think I'm reiterating that parents can continually feel discomfort, and it's okay, and it's part of trying to figure this out. And if you can learn to tolerate that discomfort a bit, you will, I then think, keep having the conversations that you need and want to have with your children so that they can continue to develop, and they will come to you with these questions instead of to their peers or on the internet, which I think is what parents really truly want and desire. And but it is about having some potentially uncomfortable conversations with their own children. But I kind of see it as like a crock pot, that you just kind of keep the crock pot on and going. And because you never know when these questions are going to come up. You never know when you're going to be sitting at the dinner table or in the car, and all of a sudden someone says, "Hey, I heard the word blowjob at school today. What does that mean?" Or, "My penis," at like a little 5-year-old or 3-year-old boy, "my penis gets really big and then it gets small. What's that all about?" It's not like they're going to come to you and request a formal sit-down conversation.
Right.
Say, "I have an important question, and here it is." And sometimes what we'll do is we'll dismiss their question, or we'll say, "Oh, we're not going to talk about that," because we're not sure how to answer, which is fine. A lot of us don't know how to answer those questions in the moment. I would suggest that you say, "That is a great question. Can we talk about that in a little while?" And then if you're not prepared with the answer, that gives you time to do some research or to figure out what you want to say. And then it's imperative that you get back to them so they know that you are going to talk about this with them. But we have this idea that when kids are 8, we'll go have this conversation with them at dinner and say, "Okay, here is how a baby is made, and this is a little bit about what sex is," and then we're not having this conversation again. And it kind of teaches kids one or two things, because if your 6-year-old comes to you and asks, "How are babies made?" and you say, "Well, we'll have that conversation when you're 8." One of the things that teaches your kids is, "Oh, I guess there are some questions that maybe I shouldn't ask." And then you'll be lucky if they come back and ask you that question again. Or it's, "Okay, I've taken my kid out to dinner and now I'm done talking with them." So it kind of sends the message, all right, so that's a topic I can only talk about with my mom and dad when we're out to dinner. And how often is that going to happen?
Or when it's like a formal invitation, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it kind of helps foster some of the underlying anxiety around sex, because it makes it seem like it's this huge thing that we can only talk about at this time, as opposed to, again, just kind of incorporating it into your daily life. if it comes up at dinner and if it's an appropriate time, answer the question. Go for it. You don't need to wait. In my family, we've had a lot of family conversations when we use the word more, like, oh, it's time to tell you some more about sex. But no, it's time to tell you some more. And usually when we have those more conversations, we invite our older kids in as well so that the younger kids can see, oh, okay, we just talked about this with everybody. It's not just with mom and dad. And so it gives the older kids a constant review as well. I've had a lot of parents ask me, well, what happens if your kid never asks you? They never ask. They're 9 or 10. They've never asked me how babies are made. How do I bring this up? And a really gentle way to bring it up is to get some great books, magazines, whatever, and just kind of have them around, have them in your bookshelf so that when the kids are looking at a book, they can pick that out and bring it to you and go, oh, wow, look at this. This is a book about bodies. Let's look at this. And it's a great way to kind of open the conversation up without, again, having to say, all right, we're going to formally sit down. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes there are, with our oldest daughter, she wanted to know everything and had questions all the time. With our second daughter, she really didn't want to know. And at a certain point, we just said, it's time for you to know some more because for your own sexual health, this is important. And we talked about it for about 5 minutes. She said, is that it? We said, yeah. Do you have any other questions? Nope. Okay. Can I go now? Yes, you can. We're going to keep talking about this, though. Okay. And so with her, we've had to have just some more of, okay, time for a review. Let's see. Let's make sure you know these different things because it's the same as, do you know how to brush your teeth? Do you know how to comb your hair? Do you know how to take care of your body when it's stinky? These are all having these types of conversations. Do you know how your own body works? Do you know what it means if somebody wants to kiss you and how are you going to navigate that? Do you know what it means if you want to kiss them? How are you going to navigate that? And you're just helping them with their overall health as they go through the world.
Teaching accurate vocabulary and even not shaming kids for touching themselves and instead maybe just, guiding them to a private place. Kind of like you had mentioned, while you can go to the bathroom to pick your nose, you can direct kids who are maybe touching themselves in front of other people, or a pretty common place to do it is in front of the TV. They kind of zone out and then they don't even realize that they're touching themselves, and it might make other siblings or kids uncomfortable or things of that nature. So you can just kind of, very matter-of-factly say, hey, if you want to do that, if you want to touch your penis or your vulva, that's more of a private thing, and you can do that in your bedroom. Do you have any thoughts about like what kinds of things we can actually tell our kids when these things come up?
Just that, again, just basically saying, I think what you said was really great, but just that this is, you can almost even validate it even more. Like, look, your body is working just how it should. Isn't that fantastic? And isn't it neat that Heavenly Father made such a beautiful body for you? And just to kind of even help send in a little bit of more of a message of sex positiveness for the future, or body positiveness, and that's not even a word, I just made that up, but positive body image for the future. Like, yeah, my body works really great and I am grateful for it, and it is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. Because I think that's sometimes, if we just say, please go do that in your room, don't do it out here, it can be a little bit of, well, why? Is this not a good thing? And so to kind of align it with, oh, this is actually really normal and your body works great. There's just a time and a place, and now it's not the time or the place,
This idea of private is not dirty, right? So just because you're saying, hey, this is a private thing, or you do this in private, that does not mean it's bad. Or
right.
And I like how you said, that we can make sure that we're adding sex positive messages and not just sending them to their rooms, which can seem almost like a punishment or a hidden thing or a secret thing. That private is great. It's great to have private time. And that's not a bad thing. And I will say too that, I mean, I'll be bringing on others to talk about adolescent sexual education as well. And the Parent's Guide, of course, follows through in adolescent time to say that you should be talking about how masturbation is not an appropriate form of self-expression. I don't agree with that. I think most people that know me or my work know that I don't agree with that. I think there's lots of ways that you can include masturbation and healthy sexuality, but that's an area where there's just not really a lot of room yet to normalize masturbation for teens and young adults, unfortunately, in our culture.
I agree with you. I think it's very unfortunate because I think it halts sexual development, but you're right, that's a podcast for another time.
Right. Yeah.
I do want to say that on my website, sexmadesimple.com, there is an ebook that you can purchase for about $5, and it goes through a lot of what I've just talked about, but even in more detail. So if you want a little bit more of a guide, you can go there and get that as well.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about naming body parts, normalizing self-touch, normalizing questions, and I think I want to definitely cover this area that I think whenever we bring up children, prepubescent children, I think a lot of people think of sexual education for them as avoiding sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. And so this is a scary topic. I mean, that, when we talk about sexuality and being pro-sex, or it doesn't mean that there aren't scary aspects of sexuality. So I'd like to have a little bit of a discussion about your thoughts of how we can go about teaching self-protective practices. I mean, when grown-ups take advantage of small kids, that's very difficult to expect a child to know how to even stand up to that. But there are things that we know can help children at least know themselves well enough, or if something happens, to at least tell an adult afterwards.
One of the real anxieties for parents, and one reason why parents sometimes will avoid even talking to their kids about anything about sex, is the real concern about some sort of sexual abuse occurring. And that is a real fear and a real thing, unfortunately, that exists in our society. But as I mentioned earlier, studies show over and over that giving kids information and knowledge actually empowers them more to have greater say over their bodies. It doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be able to stand up to an adult in all situations, but when children are empowered or educated, that a lot of times that confidence can actually come through, and oftentimes they may or may not even be singled out as a potential victim. So, meaning, what we do, and this is a hard one because I'm still working on the balance with this too, but when kids are little and people come over, we're quick to say, go give them a hug. Go give that person a hug. Oh, let them kiss you. And we don't give our children room to say, I don't want to, or I'm not comfortable, or no. And we kind of force them into it, as opposed to beginning to teach them to honor their own instincts. And if they're uncomfortable or they don't want to and they want to say no, we're more uncomfortable with protecting the feelings of the adult who does want to hug them, as opposed to respecting the feelings and honoring our own children if they're feeling uncomfortable and don't want to. And that's a paradigm shift for most of us as parents, because we all grew up doing that same thing, being kissed by Aunt so-and-so or whatever. But that, in a small way, teaches children, again, that they don't necessarily have the right to say no over their own bodies and the right to kind of set their own boundaries. And so to work on finding a balance, and if your child is really expressing discomfort or uncertainty about hugging anybody, or that might be an opener to a conversation too. to, to try and figure out what's going on and what are you comfortable with and why do you feel this way and how do you feel about your body or whatever. Just some different questions to let them know that you're interested in their experience and what's happening with them. And all of that is going to help them as they become teenagers, where you really want them to respect other people's bodies and their bodies and be able to say no or respect somebody else when they say no. That becomes a vital part of their ongoing sexual health.
One of the things that I've incorporated in my own sexual education of my children is very direct information about when it's okay for people to touch certain parts of your body and when it's not. So, for example, there's small children who are going to need help with wiping, or you're going to be going to a doctor's appointment. But I would say, even at a doctor's appointment, mom or dad should be there, a nurse should be there. It's never just the doctor by themselves.
Yep.
And then we talk about, because, a lot of people think that this might happen with strangers, but the reality is that sexual abuse is most often happening with people in your family or friends. And so, not that I want necessarily these ideas to be put in my kid's head, but I'm just, what if, Uncle so-and-so does this? What if Aunt so-and-so does this? Not that they're going to, right? But even if it's somebody that you trust and love as much as you do this aunt or uncle or grandma or grandpa or even mom or dad, what do you do then? Because that can get really tricky when you love somebody and you feel like they're going to get in trouble, So we go through some of those scenarios. Again, not to freak them out that that's what's going to happen with these loved people, but I just want to make sure they understand, even if it's somebody they really love and care for, it's still okay to come talk to mom or dad about this. Yeah,
that's such an important point, to make sure they understand that they will not get in trouble, that you will believe them, and that even if someone says, a lot of times, unfortunately, the threat is, if you tell your mom and dad, I'll kill you, or I'll kill them. And to basically let them know that no matter what is said to them, that it's a lie, and that they can tell you anything, and that it's going to be, that you're going to help them. And a guideline that a lot of parents will use is that it's just not okay for anyone to touch you where your swimsuit would cover. And so that's a really easy visual for most children to have, to go, oh, okay, this is the part of my body that is just mine. And that's what I encourage parents to teach their children, is that while their body is just theirs, we're out in public, we bump into people, we shake hands with people. It's not that it's not your body, but there is a part of your body that is just yours, that you have total say over, and does not get to be touched by anybody unless you are at a certain point and can say yes. We're sending so many messages to girls right now about being modest, and girls need to understand that how they dress is not indicative of choices that somebody else is going to make regarding whether or not their body gets touched. But that is that person's choice, and not because of what the girl was wearing. And I think younger and younger girls are starting to get this message, and it's becoming more problematic.
Yeah, it's very concerning to me that we're putting on adult expectations on children both ways. I think it's interesting when we cover them up, and I also think it's interesting when we put, for example, a little girl in a bikini. Not to shame anybody who wants to put their little girl in a bikini, but I'm just saying it's this message of her breasts that are not even developed are being covered. And so it's just kind of I think it's interesting that we cover girls at all on their breast area, so there's a lot of European countries where you just see little girls kind of with a bottom like boys have, because their chest is not developed. Why are we sexualizing, in a sense, their chest? I'm not saying that you should never cover your daughter's chest in a bathing suit. I have done that. But
because it's our cultural norm.
It's our cultural norm, but I think it's an interesting commentary on kind of the messages on both sides of the table, that yes, these bodies will develop into adult beings, but they're not adult right now. And
right.
I'm not sure that we need to project those types of messages onto our children's bodies.
Yeah. And one thing that, as we've kind of circled around, I hope that parents listening will start to grasp that there's so much more to sexual health than just teaching them about intercourse or how babies are made. We've talked about self-exploration. We've talked about sexual abuse. We've talked about a little bit about modesty. We've talked about naming body parts. All of that goes into teaching your children about sex, not just the one-time talk about the birds and the bees, which also is something I'm so passionate about, that we just have to move beyond that. Because, again, with the internet, kids are fairly savvy, and if they want a question answered, they're just going to look it up. And parents have to decide if they want to take on the responsibility of teaching their children, or if they want to let the internet teach their children. And I would say that 100% of parents would rather not have the internet teach their child about sex, but that's exactly what's going to happen, because they know the information is out there. And those days are gone when a kid asks you a question and you get to just avoid it, because they're going to learn it one way or the other. And wouldn't it be nice if they learned it from you, according to your own personal values and your family values and whatever it is you want to teach them?
Right, and then not to make the mistake that your family values are not to have sex before you're married. That may be one value,
right? But
your sexual values really have to do with sexual health throughout a lifetime,
exactly.
As they become adults, which I think sometimes we forget. We're so anxious about that one aspect of it. And then, we see many people later in life that can't really enjoy their sexuality because so much of their sexual messaging when they were young was so fear-based and negative-based. So you really want to make sure you're addressing your own kind of anxieties and fears that are scary. It is scary to think of a 13, 14, 15-year-old, making choices that are very different from your values, or that can cause a lot of problems in their lives. So those are scary things. And yet we want to have a more expanded view of our child's lifelong ability to be a sexual person.
Yes, that is exactly why I started talking to parents, because I work with so many adults and couples and realize so much of their struggles started in childhood around what they did or did not learn about sexuality in their own bodies, and has gone into their adult relationships and is causing them a lot of pain. And I want to go back and try and vaccinate younger children so that they can grow up and enter into the type of relationship they want to have, and that brings them happiness.
So let's talk about two more things that have to do with actual child behavior. So children are doing different things that can freak adults out, especially in this age of consent and sexual accountability that it has been more than ever before, which is wonderful. But at the same time, a lot of people don't know how to necessarily manage when things happen, for example, like kids playing doctor, or kids comparing their genitalia to one another, right? Or kids even acting out sexual kind of role-playing, like they might be on top of each other, fully clothed, or they've unclothed, so maybe things that they've seen their parents do, or even have come across with some pornography. And even sibling relationships, right? That you've got siblings who are maybe 2 years of age difference, or 3 year, 3 under, I would say, years difference, that are maybe having some sexual playfulness with one another that we would deem inappropriate. What do all these things mean? And I think oftentimes, although they're concerning, they're also normative, and we tend to freak out a bit about these things, and sometimes treat them even as criminal actions in schools if they happen at school, or treat them as criminal actions in our home. So you want to talk a little bit about kind of childhood play around sexuality, and where is that line between abuse and just normal curiosity?
Yeah. Because it's, like you said, children are great mimics. I mean, they play house, they play school, they play whatever profession their parents are. And so if they see some sort of sexual interaction on TV or on the internet, or just affection between their parents, this may be something where they're like, what's this all about? I know that my 5-year-old daughter came up and she said, Mom, I'm going to kiss you like the prince. And she proceeded to grasp my face and put her mouth on my mouth and wanted to move her head side to side like she had seen and kind of give me a kiss in a really sensual way. And, there's part of me that was alarmed, like, oh, wait, this is not how I want to kiss my 5-year-old. But also recognizing that she was just trying out something that she had seen. And so I just gently stopped and I said, I love to kiss you, but let me kiss you how a mom kisses a daughter. And I gave her a kiss on her lips and said, just like this. This is how you and I get to kiss, and it's so nice. And when you get older, then you can kiss somebody like you were just practicing with them. And it's to see it as a normal response, again, like you were saying, to what they're seeing, and to try. It can be so difficult not to have a reaction and go, what are you doing? And because that's just a natural reaction on the parts of most of us. But if you walk in and you see your 6-year-old and your neighbor kid and they're playing doctor and they have their clothes off, it's really important to take a breath and go, oh, okay, you're playing doctor. So let's put our clothes back on and let's talk about, are you interested in bodies? And if they're curious, you can get out the body book and let them look at it, and then, distract them or reroute them into another activity. And then maybe you make a little rule that, hey, you know what, we're going to play with the door open for a while. And you're not necessarily telling them, hey, you don't play doctor ever, and you don't do this, and you don't do that. It's a matter of you're kind of teaching them again how to navigate this in the appropriate way without necessarily shaming them and saying, what you were doing was bad and wrong. It was, let's work with this. And what are you curious about? And maybe you talk to your neighbor and say, hey, here's what they were playing. Just thought you might want to know. Just thought you might want to, in case you want to have a conversation with your kid. Maybe they're interested in learning more about sex or something to that degree. But it's more of managing our own reactions and understanding that this is, like you said, a normal part of development. Now, if there's an age range that's quite a bit different, like an 11-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy, or vice versa, that's something different because there's enough of an age difference that it becomes more into an alarming and concerning realm where there might be need to be some greater intervention. But we're talking about normal childhood activities that occur all the time. Kids play doctor. Kids are curious, especially if boys and girls are playing together. They're curious. Hey, what is that? That's your penis? What does it look like? Show me. Because they're just interested. Children are the most interested and curious people on the planet. And as parents, we just get to help them navigate that.
Yeah, and that's not even to minimize that sometimes these things can stay with you,
Sure.
As far as, so I've had clients tell me, yeah, I was playing doctor with my friend, I asked the age, they're pretty similar age, and it's still something that's bothering them years later, like I didn't feel like I knew how to say no, and I showed my body part, and I was really ashamed about that, and, so they're chalking that as a traumatic experience.
Yes.
Even though it would fall under what we'd consider normative childhood behavior. So I think it can be both. It's not that it's not traumatic or, especially with whatever messages you're feeling like you're getting in other areas of your life. But I do think that there is an element for us to get a little bit too freaked out or think that there's some deviance going on with children who are really just, like you said, curious. And what a great opportunity to start, like you're saying, asking a lot of questions, having some good talks, even having some boundary talks. Like, it makes parents uncomfortable when you're maybe naked in front of each other, because we know that that's kind of a private thing, but it doesn't mean you're in trouble. It just means that if you're going to play together in our home, then we're not going to want to play in that particular way. But, you have that other kid over the next day, or so you're not, like, oh my gosh, you're never going to be able to have that friend over again. or after a conversation that's kind of difficult, everybody goes out for ice cream, so it's kind of not this horrific, ton type of moment. And yet you're still teaching boundaries that you want in your home, and how what's appropriate play and what maybe isn't appropriate play, not because it's bad, but that's just kind of the rules of our house, or the rules of this other family's house, or etc.
Yeah, and one thing we also know about child development is children like structure. They like to know what the rules are. So, teaching them, it's not like you're this mean mom if you set boundaries in your own house, like, do you let them jump on the couch or not? Okay, you don't. That's the rule in your house. Then you can also set other rules and boundaries. That's just, again, you're giving them the structure that they need and want, and you're also, in some ways, teaching them about healthy boundaries. And it can be a good conversation to have with your kids' friends, parents, like, so what do you let them do at your house so that I understand what's happening over there? What are some of the rules you have at your house, so I can tell my kid, hey, you know what, we don't jump on the couch at their house, and or we don't play doctor at their house, or whatever it may be. And it's going to open up also that great conversation about boundaries, because if your child was playing doctor, it's a great way to say, hey, did you ask your friend if they wanted to play doctor, or did you just start playing? Oh, you just started playing? Well, it's really important to ask if somebody wants to play a game like that. Or vice versa. Did they ask you? Yeah, and I didn't feel like I could say no. Okay, well, let's talk about it. Let's find out why. And that gives you an opening to go, okay, there are some boundaries here that I need to help shore up, and how am I going to go about this?
Yeah, excellent. So let's move the conversation then into pornography, because we do know that the chances of kids seeing pornography does get earlier. I mean, I think by now it's probably about 7 to 8 years old, although we may want to have discussion too about how we define pornography. Yeah. But even if it's not hardcore pornography, there's billboards and lots of ads and things that people, kids will see, as far as just even the sexualization of women or men as selling products, etc. So what do you want to say about that?
I read a fantastic article not too long ago talking about, I think it's called The People in My Phone or something. And I loved the analogy. I thought it was so relatable with kids. He talked about the difference between a car chase that you see on TV versus reality, because we can see kids are driving around in the car all the time. They know that we are not jumping from building to building and careening around corners, and that is not reality. The problem that we have, though, is children aren't seeing a real sexual relationship, because that's something that parents are keeping private. And so what they're running into is the unreality of it on the internet or on billboards, and it's hard for them to distinguish, okay, is this real? Is this not real? What is this? And especially when it piques their curiosity. So I loved that analogy, because my kids could really relate to it. They could go, oh yeah, we don't drive around like that. And then when I said, so that is also, when it comes to sexuality, that's how it is too. What you're going to see on TV, what you may see on the internet, it is not real. There's lighting and cameras and a script and music, and it's completely different from real life, as you will discover. And so that's been a really powerful way to talk about it, because again, the fact is, like you said, pornography is around and it's not going anywhere. And so if we just hide from it, we aren't doing our children a disservice, or we aren't helping them. We need to help them and give them tools to navigate this instead of just saying only. I mean, you can say, don't look at it, it's not good for you, but if you only say that, as opposed to, if you see it or when you see it, I would love to talk to you about it. I would love to know what you saw and what you thought about it, and if it bothered you, please talk to me about it. I'm not going to get mad at you. I want to help you navigate this. I want to help you through this and figure out what it means for you, and just to really, again, encourage them to talk to you. If they are looking at billboards or they hear a lyric on the radio that bothers them and they ask you a question about that, talk to them about it and just say, yeah, that lyric means this, it means this, and unfortunately that singer chose to say it and sing about it in this way, and you don't have to like it, and we can turn the station, and it's as simple as that, and then you're moving on. Again, if I could plead with parents, if you catch your child looking at pornography, or they come and tell you that they have, two things. One, please don't shame them and get them in trouble. Please don't freak out and label them a sex addict. Please treat them with love and kindness, because they might be upset, they might be confused, concerned, and they're coming to you for help. They're not coming to you to be further shamed and embarrassed. And this works in our family. I'm not saying this will work in every family, but I'm fairly open. I'm not walking around naked, but I'm fairly open with my body when I'm getting out of the shower or whatever. And my kids know if they come in my room, there is a chance that I'm changing my clothes, and they may see me. And there have been times where my sons have walked in and I've said, yep, this is a real body. This is what a woman's body looks like after she's had children. This is actually the reality of it. So if you need to take a look, because you're not going to see the reality on TV. This is real. And again, it doesn't work for every family, but it has worked for ours, because I think it gives them and of course my sons will turn around on my daughters and be like, oh, Mom, put some clothes on. But I think it helps balance out a little bit of what they're seeing, because I certainly do not have a perfect body.
Yeah. No, I think I really like your thoughts about taking a non-shaming stance. Again, if we can look at these as opportunities to have conversations or ask questions, oftentimes our kids will not be the ones to come to us. Oftentimes they're the ones being caught. Mm-hmm. And you don't want this to start this kind of shame, secrecy cycle that we see for many adults later on, where they started at a very early age learning that this is not good behavior, this is shameful, so it drives up anxiety. And then, of course, when you're anxious, you're trying to self-soothe, and what better way to self-soothe than to do something you don't feel like you should be doing? So it just starts this really kind of complicated shame pattern that we don't want to be a part of. And so it's more about, well, what were you curious about, or what was enjoyable about that? What wasn't enjoyable about it? And not just focusing on what we think should be the answers. Like, why would you not like that? There's some really normal reasons why looking at porn actually feels good. It satiates curiosity. It is exciting. It's taboo. It's arousing. And even when we look at ads or music or all these different things that could have erotic material in it, even if it's not what we'd consider pornography, it's important, I think, to normalize the arousing aspects of that.
Totally. Yeah.
Why do people talk or sing about sex? Well, because it's a pretty big part of people's lives, and it feels good, and it's something that people have been singing about or writing about since pretty much people could sing or write. It's maybe not in the same ways. We haven't had rap music around for a while, but there's incredibly erotic poetry back from the Chinese people and way before Christ was born. So there's always been a history of erotic stories, and how do our kids' curiosity fit into that without us feeling like exactly like this is going to mean they're devious or they're going to go down some road that they can't control themselves. And we have so much angst and fear around some of these things with our kids that it can be very difficult to not actually be part of the problem, which we don't want to be.
No, because we get enough messages of what not to do and how, in their opinion, how damaging it can be, or all of this. We get enough of that. And as parents, you need to be, hopefully you can be the safe place for your children to actually talk about it and get some balancing messages of, you are okay and you are a wonderful child of God, and this is how your body works. And again, what we need to do is learn to navigate this together. Just like anything else, you're going to learn to navigate how to have a job and how to manage money, and I'm going to help you with that, just like I'm going to help you with this. And it's more of a working together, and this is where, again, parents are experiencing a paradigm shift, and we're all kind of in this together, because I tell my daughters all the time, hey, I'm learning about this new landscape with social media and the internet as I go along, because as parents, we've never had this in the history of parenting. We're the first generations to have to try and figure out, how do we help them manage a smartphone and the internet and the images they're seeing, and this is all new for us too. And so to kind of cut yourself a little slack and give yourself a little credit that you are trying to learn too. And if you make some mistakes, that's fine. You haven't ruined them for life. And you can do some repair work, and you're kind of on your kids' team as opposed to just telling them what not to do and what to do. Parenting has become, it's imperative that it's kind of become a more hands-on, team-based approach, that we navigate this together as opposed to just do what I say and that's it.
Right. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about before I let you go is this idea of parents doing their own work. Because obviously a lot of what kids pick up on, whether it's subconscious or unconscious even, is their own parents' relationship. Mm-hmm. And this is true whether you're single or married or divorced or whatever, but there are definitely messages that kids get about how comfortable we are with our own bodies. Yep. And I know that in our current culture, it's very common for especially women to talk negatively about their bodies. I'm not in shape enough. I don't look tight enough. I don't, all these ways that we kind of talk about our bodies in negative ways, which mm-hmm. is unfortunate that we're kind of made to feel that way about ourselves. But even if you are in relationship with somebody else, what is that relationship like? Do the kids see attachment or affection? If obviously they shouldn't necessarily be seeing sexual acts, but there's a lot of flirtation or non-flirtation that kids can pick up on. So if dad comes by and rubs mom's shoulders, does she tense up or does she enjoy that? If mom comes up to dad and wants to stroke his arm or hold his hand, does he engage with her or dismiss her? And, even if you're single or you're dating and kids are seeing those types of things, or even if you're single and, again, how are you relating with your own body, with other relationships, etc.? So do you want to talk a little bit about just as parents doing our own work as far as when it comes to the indirect sexual education that our kids will get from us?
Yeah, this is where kind of the rubber meets the road. This is the hardest part, I think, for parents as they're trying to. I think most parents genuinely and sincerely would like to teach their children good sexual health. What occurs when I'm in a room with parents and I'm teaching them these skills, you can feel the tension rise in the room, because what's coming up is their own feelings, their own maybe shameful feelings they experienced as children, or if they're in a current relationship, maybe what's not going right sexually in their relationship, or if they've been in a past relationship, whatever it is, their own feelings are coming up. And it's important to recognize those feelings and kind of do your own work if you need to around your sexuality, if you need to find a therapist, to work through some trauma, or a marriage counselor, whatever, because those feelings will not go away. And if you see your child engaging in some self-exploration, or if your child does see pornography that you don't want, and you experience this rush of emotions that has more to do with you than with them, then the danger is that we project those feelings onto our kids. And then they either, like you said, either pick up on it, and or we teach them nothing, or we send them a really negative message, like you said, if kids are watching and mom tenses up when dad walks by, then that message is, oh, am I not supposed to do that? Or what's happening there? Or sometimes parents will, in a moment of high emotions themselves, make some comment like, oh, your father he just always grabs me. Or like you said about body image, oh, I hate my body, I need to go on a diet. Ugh. And all those messages are being picked up by your little people and being stored away, and as they're forming their sexual identity. And again, we are not perfect people as parents, and we're going to say things, and we're going to do things, and it's okay. And we're not going to ruin our children for life, but to start to become more mindful and more conscious about our own sexual work that we still need to do, and maybe our areas of sexual health where we have gaps, and to start trying to fill those in, whether it's through a book or class or therapy, whatever you need, but to take accountability over your own life, so then you too can experience better sexual health as you go through your lifespan, and it adds to your own happiness as well.
Great. Yeah, I think that's just such an important piece of it. And I want to, on the one hand, challenge people to figure out their own health and whatever that means, and at the same time recognize that none of us are going to have that completely figured out as we raise children. Yeah. So it's kind of a balancing between understanding that, yeah, we all harm our children in ways that we never intend to. I mean, that's just part of parenting. And at the same time, there are things that we can educate ourselves on or try to shift. And I think one of the most important things that a parent can do is just to apologize. If you feel like some of these things that we've talked about today are things that you've, done because you didn't know any better as far as doing anything better, I think we're all trying to do our best. It can be really healing to just say, hey, let's have a conversation. I recognize that when you were little, maybe I didn't teach you your body parts correctly, and I'm sorry about that. I didn't know that that's maybe something I should be doing. I wasn't taught that. I didn't really know the language myself, or didn't feel comfortable teaching a little kid those parts. So I think there's something really powerful about just role modeling an apology to our kids as well.
Totally. And I think kids are generally so forgiving and so resilient that they would be like, oh, okay, yeah, let's have that conversation, or they just are ready to move on. Yeah. And so, but I do think you're right, that it touches something inside of them that goes, oh, mom's not perfect either, and she's still learning how to do this too. Okay. And it I think increases the relationship and strengthens it. And long ago, I wrote my children all letters and said, when you grow up and need to go to therapy and talk about me, I'll pay for it. Like, it's okay. And just understanding that we are going to unintentionally or sometimes intentionally do some things that hurt our kids, and that's part of the cycle. But to also understand that, and why it's important to do your own work, is that we never arrive sexually. Like, when is it in our lifespan that we go, oh, I'm here. I know everything I need to know sexually. I know everything I need to know about my partner, and we're good. And we don't need to learn anything else for the next 45 years. Unfortunately, that's not the case, because just when you arrive, maybe you do arrive for a few months, but then something changes. There's a health issue, or somebody has a baby, or the relationship dissolves and you get into a relationship with somebody else with all new circumstances, whatever it is, our sexuality is constantly changing, ongoing, and is a lifelong process. And so for adults to understand that too, like, oh, I need to continue learning, and it's okay that I don't know all of this, and is a really, I think, freeing and empowering approach to take, because then you can open up your curiosity and start playing around with sexuality again. And just, anyway, it brings a lot of good energy to your sexual relationship.
Yeah, I agree. I think just being patient with ourselves and our children as we try to just go through this messy stuff. And oftentimes your kids, you know, kind of like you said so well with your different personalities that you're trying to raise, some kids will totally engage and want to talk, and others are just going to be rolling their eyes, and it's the last thing they want to talk about, and they'll totally brush you off, like, really, Mom, you're going to talk to me about this, or Dad, you know. And just to not take that personally, like, you know that you're doing the right thing by giving an apology, by giving education, by, you know, offering different information. Those are good things. And just because kids aren't going to necessarily give you a gold stamp, that you can still give one to yourself.
Exactly. Totally. I like that. I'm going to give myself a gold stamp.
Yeah, kids are really bad. What do you want to say? Like in a job, you have a manager, right, that will give you a review of your work. Well, kids are just not really good at that.
No.
Until maybe they hit their 40s.
Yep.
Anyway. Well, I can't thank you enough for all that you have shared with us today. Why don't you just give me any closing thoughts you might have, or maybe I didn't cover something you wanted to make sure I covered, and kind of head us home.
Yeah. No, I think we covered a lot, and the points that I would just reiterate is just start with kind of the end in mind with your children. Just see them as throughout their lifespan. That kind of can give you a guide as to what you want to teach them. Expand your horizons of what sexual health is, as far as it's more than just birds and the bees, but it's really about body parts and how they work, and consent, and whatever it is that you need to teach them. But it encompasses so much more than just birds and the bees. And then really looking at child development and what is normal versus what society is kind of pushing on us, the messages that, oh, this is wrong and this is bad. Let's really study childhood a bit more. But just understanding that we are in a new landscape of parenting, and our children want and need information, and they need our help and want our help navigating all of this. And what a beautiful experience you can have as a parent to really be involved in this aspect of your child's development, and that over time you really can be an integral part of helping them develop into wonderfully happy adults. And in doing so, you may even find more happiness for yourself, and that's a beautiful symbiotic relationship right there. So be gentle with yourself as parents. Know you're going to make mistakes. It's going to be fine. Just keep learning and keep engaging with your children.
Thank you. Are there any resources, by chance, any books that you'd recommend either for kids or for grown-ups as far as sex ed goes?
Yeah, I really like, one of my favorites is called Where Willie Went, and it's just a children's book about how a sperm gets to an egg, and it's about the sperm itself. He's in a swimming race. His name's Willie. I do really like It's Perfectly Normal. Some people do not like that book. I really like that book. It shows all different types of bodies, all different types of relationships, and I think it's a wonderful book. And then for older kids, I really like Al Vernacchio's book, Forgiveness Sex, is wonderful.
Yeah, and he has agreed to be on those shows, so that's why I'm excited to bring him on to talk about teen education.
Oh, that'll be fantastic. Everybody should tune into that, because he's so great. And then I'll just say it one more time, but on my website, sexmadesimple.com, there is an ebook there that can also help guide you through some of these conversations. So
great, and I'll make sure and link to all of that. So thank you again, Alisha, for your time and expertise on the subject. You just do a fabulous job of talking through some of these things in a very just accepting and loving way. So I just so much appreciate your energy. Thanks for being on today.
Thanks, Natasha. I really loved it and loved talking to you.
We took the long road home, turned minutes into miles, and as the evening traveled on, the sunset bathed your smile. We stopped beneath the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth.
It's been a long road here, a trail with tears, pain and sorrow too.
But through every storm we traveled on, like lovers do. And if sometimes we fell apart, we always came back home. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. Some people say love is blind and forever is too long. But I see your eyes in every sunrise. Can't imagine life alone. Let's take the long road on together until we're gone. Want you by my side till the day I die and into the beyond. It's as simple as our love is. That's how I wanna go, all wrapped up in the arms of our extraordinary, it's nothing ordinary love. Ordinary. No, it's extraordinary.